The silver Ferrari shimmered in the afternoon sun, like a beast in chains, polished but lifeless. A crowd gathered outside the luxury mansion in Beverly Hills as one of the wealthiest men in California. Martin Holloway smirked at a young black mechanic standing in his driveway. "Tell you what," Martin sneered, tossing the keys into the air. "If you can make that engine run in 10 minutes, I'll give you the Ferrari. But if you fail, you'll wash my cars for a month. Deal?" The mechanic, Elijah Carter, tall, calm, wearing an old work jumpsuit and oil-stained gloves, looked up with quiet dignity. "Sir, I don't make bets. I fix what's broken." The rich crowd laughed. Phones recorded. Even Martin's friends were egging him on. "Come on, Elijah," one said mockingly. "Let's see if those hands can handle something worth more than your house." Elijah didn't reply. He simply walked to the Ferrari, placed a gentle hand on its hood, and closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to its heartbeat. What no one knew was that this Ferrari once belonged to his late father, stolen years ago after his family was forced to sell everything when their small auto shop was sabotaged by corporate greed. And the man mocking him right now was the one who destroyed his father's dream. When that engine roared to life minutes later, the smirks froze. And when Elijah spoke, calm, proud, and unbroken, every soul there would remember his words forever, because sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. It wears grease-stained gloves. Rain whispered against the marble driveway like tiny shards of glass, each drop catching the glow of the mansion's golden lights. The Holloway estate looked more like a castle than a home, with towering gates and polished sculptures gleaming under the storm. In the middle of that opulence sat a lifeless Ferrari F40, its cherry-red body soaked, its once mighty engine silent. Martin Holloway, a billionaire who wore arrogance like a second skin, paced impatiently beside the car. His expensive Italian shoes splashed through puddles as he barked orders at his workers. "Get this junk out of my sight. I paid millions for perfection, not a paperweight," one of the staff muttered nervously. "Sir, we've already called 3 specialists. None could figure out what's wrong with it." Martin's nostrils flared. "Then call someone who can actually earn what I pay." From the long driveway came the sputter of an old pickup truck. Heads turned as the rusty vehicle came to a stop. Out stepped Elijah Carter, mid-30s, tall and composed, with calm brown eyes that reflected wisdom far beyond his years. His jumpsuit read Carter's Garage, the lettering faded but stitched with care. He didn't look like he belonged there. Not among the suits, the luxury cars, and the sneering faces watching from the porch. Yet there was something about his posture, quiet confidence, not defiance, that drew attention. Elijah removed his cap and nodded respectfully. "I heard you needed a mechanic, sir." Martin looked him over, one eyebrow raised. "You? You look like you fix bicycles, not Ferraris." A few guests chuckled behind him, champagne glasses clinking. One whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe he's here to clean the tires, not fix them." Elijah smiled faintly, unbothered. "Every engine has a heart, sir," he said softly. "Some just need someone who knows how to listen." The laughter grew louder. Martin smirked. "You think that poetic nonsense will fix my car?" Elijah's eyes met his. "No. My hands will." Something about that calm answer, unshaken, humble yet certain, made even the rain seem to pause. Martin, never one to resist a spectacle, waved to his friends. "All right, folks. Let's have some fun." He grabbed the Ferrari's keys, spinning them around his finger like a taunt. "If you can make her roar again in 10 minutes, I'll give her to you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But," Martin added, a cruel grin twisting his face, "if you fail, you'll wash every car in my garage for a month. Deal?" Elijah wiped his wet hands on his jumpsuit, his expression unreadable. "I don't make bets," he said, "but I fix what's broken." Martin chuckled. "So, you're scared?" Elijah caught the keys mid-air before they could hit the ground. "No, sir. I just don't see the point of gambling when I already know the outcome." A murmur spread through the guests. Even Martin's smirk faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "Clock's ticking, boy." Elijah walked over to the Ferrari, rain streaming down his face. The crowd whispered and filmed on their phones, certain they were about to witness another rich man's joke. He opened the hood slowly, almost reverently. The gleam of metal reflected his somber eyes as his fingers traced the parts. Then his breath caught. There on a small metal plate near the carburetor were 5 engraved words, "Built with heart, Carter and Son, 1998. His throat tightened. His father's mark. His father's legacy. Harold Carter, his late father, had once owned a small neighborhood garage. People came from miles away for his craftsmanship. He taught Elijah that engines weren't just machines, they were souls of motion. But when Halloway Motors opened across the street, everything changed. Martin's company used underhanded tactics, spreading lies, cutting prices until Harold's business collapsed. His father never recovered from the loss. The night he died, Elijah promised his mother that one day he would reclaim what was stolen from them, and now fate had brought him right here, standing in front of the man who had destroyed his father's dream. Elijah, one of Martin's guests, jeered, "You sure you know what you're doing?" He didn't respond. He was lost in memory and purpose. His hands moved instinctively, checking spark plugs, fuel lines, ignition coils. Each motion was steady, confident, almost tender. Martin leaned closer, smirking. "I have got 5 minutes left, hero." Elijah didn't look up. "Perfection takes patience," the crowd murmured. The rain poured harder. Elijah's heartbeat synchronized with the rhythm of the falling drops. In that storm, he wasn't fixing a car. He was healing something deeper. His father's broken pride, his own buried pain, and the justice time had long denied. When his hand brushed against the final wire, a soft click echoed. He turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed once, then roared to life with a thunderous growl that sent shivers through the air. Gasps erupted. The Ferrari gleamed under the rain like a phoenix reborn. Elijah stepped back, face calm but eyes glistening. "She remembers," he whispered. Martin's grin faded. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble. How did you—" Elijah wiped his hands on a rag. "It just needed someone who still cared." The rain stopped. The crowd was silent. And in that silence, justice had begun to hum beneath the roar of an engine that was never truly lost. The rain had softened into a mist, but tension still lingered in the air like static. The Ferrari purred steadily beside them, the symbol of something far greater than machinery. For Elijah, it wasn't just an engine that had come alive. It was a voice long silenced finally speaking again. Martin's guests huddled beneath umbrellas, murmuring to each other. Some recorded on their phones. Others simply stared in disbelief. The billionaire stood motionless. His polished shoes splattered with rainwater, his pride cracked. "Elijah Carter," Martin said finally, his tone sharp but uncertain. "You're some kind of magician?" Elijah shrugged slightly. "Just a mechanic who listens." Martin's laughter returned, forced, bitter. "Well, congratulations. You've won your little show. You can take the Ferrari." He tossed the car's title at Elijah's feet like it was trash. Gasps rippled through the crowd again, some of admiration, some of disgust at the display. Elijah looked down at the wet paper, then back up at Martin. "I didn't do this for your car," he said quietly. "You don't give away something that was never truly yours." Martin frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Elijah took a slow breath. He walked toward the Ferrari, his hand brushing the hood as if greeting an old friend. "This car was built by a man named Harold Carter, my father. You bought his design when his business collapsed. You told the world it was yours." The air turned still. Martin blinked, stunned. Your father?" Elijah nodded, voice steady. "Carter and Son, 1998. You remember that name, don't you?" For the first time, Martin's expression faltered. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something that almost looked like recognition. That small-town garage?" "The same one," Elijah replied. His voice softened, but his eyes burned with truth. "You didn't just take his design. You took his hope. And when the contracts fell through, when the banks came for the shop, he still said one thing to me before he died." Elijah paused, looking down. The rain masked the tears forming in his eyes. "I said, 'One day, son, someone will see that what's made with love can't be stolen.'" A heavy silence settled over the group. No one dared move. Even the storm seemed to have stopped to listen. Martin cleared his throat, attempting to reassert dominance. "That's a touching story," he said coldly, "but the world doesn't run on love, Mr. Carter. It runs on ownership, paperwork, patents." Elijah nodded slowly. And yet you couldn't make this car breathe again. That one sentence hit harder than any insult could. Martin's jaw tightened. What do you want from me? Money, recognition? Elijah shook his head. Neither. Just respect for what you called worthless. He turned toward the small group of onlookers who had fallen completely silent. See, everyone here knows the price of things, but almost no one knows their value. My father built this to be driven, not displayed. He believed every bolt had a purpose, just like every person does. A woman in the crowd whispered, "He's right." But Martin silenced her with a glare. Elijah continued, "You can own the brand, the papers, the fame, but you'll never own what built it, heart." The Ferrari's engine, still idling softly, gave a low rumble as if echoing his words. Martin's voice rose again, defensive, brittle. "You think you're some kind of philosopher because you fixed a car?" Elijah met his gaze evenly. "No, I just think you forgot how to appreciate what others build for you." Martin looked away, breathing hard. For the first time he seemed smaller, not in stature but in spirit. Elijah bent down, picked up the soggy car title, folded it, and pressed it into Martin's palm. "Keep your Ferrari. You need it more than I do." The billionaire stared at the wet paper, his hand trembling slightly. "You're walking away from millions?" "I'm walking toward peace," Elijah said quietly. He turned to leave, rain falling gently around him. But as he reached his old pickup truck, a voice called from behind. Wait, it wasn't Martin this time. It was one of the young workers from the mansion's staff. Barely 20, wearing an oversized jacket, he stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Carter, can you teach me how to do that? To fix something like that?" Elijah paused, looking at the young man, a mirror of his own younger self. His heart softened. "You already can," he said. "All it takes is patience and respect." The worker nodded, smiling faintly. Elijah gave one last glance toward Martin, whose eyes were lowered, lost in something deeper than pride. Then he climbed into his pickup, started the engine, and drove off, leaving behind a driveway that no longer glistened with arrogance, but with the echo of truth. Inside the Ferrari, the engine purred. Alive once more, a machine reborn not through wealth but through memory, and in that sound, even the proudest heart at the mansion couldn't help but remember, some things can't be bought, silenced or stolen, because they were made with love. The Ferrari's engine sang through the wet, empty streets, a low, thunderous growl that carried the storm's rhythm. The nightlights flickered off the polished red hood as Elijah drove, his hand steady on the wheel, his mind a storm of memory and emotion. Every gear shift felt like flipping through the pages of his life. The sound of the engine was his father's voice whispering from the past. "Steady, son. Listen to her heartbeat." He smiled faintly, even as tears mixed with the rain on his cheeks. For the first time since his father's death, Elijah didn't feel the weight of loss. He felt presence. The Ferrari wasn't just running. It was alive again, their creation reborn. As the rain eased into drizzle, Elijah turned off the main road and pulled into the small parking lot of Carter's garage, a forgotten relic on the edge of town. The old sign still hung crooked, the paint faded, the letters barely legible. The place smelled of oil, rust, and ghosts. He parked the Ferrari under the flickering neon light and stepped out. The puddles rippled under his boots as he walked toward the garage door. He hesitated and then unlocked it. The creak echoed through the quiet night. Inside, dust particles danced in the dim light. Old tools hung where his father had left them. The workbench was still scattered with bolts, sketches, and a faded photo of Harold Carter, smiling, grease-stained and proud. Elijah touched the frame gently. "She runs again, Pop," he whispered. "Your masterpiece breathes." The memory hit him hard. A 10-year-old boy watching his father work late into the night, always humming, always teaching. "You see this bolt, son?" Harold had said, holding up a shiny metal piece. "It's small, but without it the car falls apart. Just like people, every one of us matters." Elijah closed his eyes. Those words had shaped him, carried him through every hardship, and tonight they had brought him full circle. He walked back outside, stood beside the Ferrari, and stared at the reflection of the garage in its glossy hood. "Carter and son," he murmured. "They're still here, Dad. They couldn't take it away." A car approached slowly from the road. The sound made him turn, frowning. The headlights dimmed, and a sleek black Bentley stopped beside the Ferrari. Martin Holloway stepped out. No entourage, no umbrella, no smirk. The billionaire looked human. The rain had flattened his perfect hair. His designer suit was damp. He seemed smaller than the man who had mocked Elijah hours ago. Elijah folded his arms. "Didn't think you'd follow me," Martin exhaled, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't plan to, but I needed to understand who you are." Elijah's gaze stayed steady. "I'm the son of the man you took everything from." Martin nodded slowly. "I know." He walked closer, his polished shoes sinking into the mud. "I didn't realize until you said his name. Harold Carter was the best engineer I ever met. I wanted his mind on my team, but he refused to sell." "You didn't want to hire him," Elijah said sharply. "You wanted to own him." Martin flinched at the truth of it. "Maybe I did. I was young, ruthless, desperate to build an empire. I didn't care who got crushed under it." Elijah's jaw tightened. "You crushed a man who believed in honesty." Martin's eyes lowered. "And I've paid for it in ways you can't see. I have money, cars, power, but no peace. Tonight when I saw you with that car," he paused, shaking his head, "I realized I built everything wrong." For the first time, Elijah saw something different in Martin's face. Not arrogance, but regret. "Real painful regret," Martin continued softly. "That car, it's not just metal. It's a legacy. And it belongs to you. I was wrong to offer it like a trophy." He held out the car's title again, the paper now dry, his hand trembling. "Take it, Elijah. For your father." Elijah didn't move. His silence stretched between them like the space between guilt and forgiveness. Then he spoke. "You can't buy redemption with a car, Mr. Holloway." Martin's shoulders slumped. "I'm not trying to, I just want to make it right somehow." Elijah stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "Then don't make it right with me. Make it right with every small man you stepped on to stand tall." Martin nodded, the words hitting deep. "You're right. I can start by honoring your father's name. Carter and Son deserves to be remembered." Elijah studied him for a long moment. "Words are easy, Martin. Actions prove them." Martin's eyes lifted, sincerity flickering there. "Then let me prove it." Elijah finally extended his hand. Martin looked at it, hesitant, then grasped it firmly. For the first time in years, two men who once stood on opposite sides of power shared something stronger than business: understanding. The rain stopped entirely. The air smelled clean again. Elijah said quietly, "You know, it's strange. My father used to say, 'One day you'll meet the man behind the wheel, the one who drives life, not just cars.'" Maybe he meant this. Martin gave a faint, remorseful smile. Maybe he did. As they stood beside the Ferrari, the car that had carried both pride and pain, it no longer symbolized humiliation or wealth. It had become something else, a bridge between the past and redemption. And for the first time that night, the storm truly passed, outside and within. That night the rain returned. It wasn't the harsh, taunting rain that had soaked Elijah when he first accepted the challenge. It was a softer drizzle, the kind that felt like tears the sky forgot to keep. Inside his penthouse, Martin Kane sat in silence. The walls were lined with awards, glossy plaques, and signed deals, symbols of a life built on competition and ego. Yet none of them could drown the sound echoing in his head, the purr of the Ferrari engine that roared to life under Elijah's touch. He leaned forward, gripping his whiskey glass. The ice had melted long ago. "That man," he muttered. "That boy, he made it look easy." Elena, his wife, stood by the window. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, like someone who had spent too long living with someone else's pride. "Maybe it was easy," she said quietly, "for someone who wasn't doing it to prove something." Martin turned, his voice sharp. "You think I humiliated him for fun?" She didn't flinch. "No, you did it because you needed to feel superior. You've been chasing your father's ghost your whole life, Martin. Maybe today that ghost finally stopped running." Her words hit him like the thunder outside. For a moment his breath caught. He remembered being a young mechanic's son himself, standing in his father's oil-stained garage, dreaming of owning machines he could barely touch. His father used to say, "Respect every man who knows how to build, son." Owning means nothing without understanding. Martin had forgotten that. Somewhere between his first million and his private jet, He'd buried that voice deep under ambition. He stood, pacing restlessly. I gave him that car. I kept my word. Elena sighed. You gave him what was already his, Martin. The only thing you truly lost today was the illusion that you were better. Across town, Elijah sat in the dim light of his father's garage, the Ferrari gleaming softly beside him. He had spent the evening cleaning, fixing, remembering. Dust floated through the air like quiet memories. On the wall hung an old photograph. His father, Harold Carter, smiling proudly beside a much younger Elijah, both covered in grease and laughter. He traced the photo frame with his thumb. You'd laugh if you saw this, Pops. That same man who mocked you gave me his car, the one he said I could never touch. For a moment, silence filled the room. Only the rain tapping the roof answered him. Then Elijah smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. Guess we showed them what real craftsmanship looks like. He remembered being 10 years old, watching his father rebuild a wrecked Chevy from scratch. Every night his dad would hand him a wrench and say, "Feel the machine breathe, son. Cars don't just run on fuel, they run on care." Elijah never forgot those words. That care had brought the Ferrari to life, but more than that, it had brought his father's spirit back to him. The next morning a knock echoed through the quiet garage. Elijah wiped his hands and opened the door. To his shock, Martin stood there. No tailored suit, no entourage, just a man in a rain-soaked jacket holding a faded photo. "I know I'm not welcome," Martin said quietly, eyes downcast. "But I needed to see you." Elijah folded his arms, wary. "You've seen enough. You made your bet and I won." Martin nodded slowly. "You did. But that's not why I came." He held up the photo. It was a black and white picture of two men working side by side in an old garage. Elijah's eyes widened. "That's my father." Martin swallowed hard. "He taught me everything I knew about engines. I was his apprentice before I ever built my first company. He believed in me when I had nothing. And when I became rich, I pretended not to know him. The words trembled out of him like confession. I heard he passed years ago," Martin continued, voice breaking. "I never even went to his funeral. The least I could do was show respect to his son." For the first time, Elijah saw something real behind Martin's eyes. Not arrogance, but guilt. Deep, crushing guilt. "You could have honored him by remembering his lessons," Elijah said softly. "Not by using your power to make others feel small." Martin nodded, eyes wet. "I know. That's why I'm here." He looked around the garage, the peeling paint, the worn tools, the reborn Ferrari gleaming like redemption. "Your father would be proud. You built something real, something I lost a long time ago." Elijah didn't answer right away. He just looked at the photo again, his father standing between a younger Harold and Martin, both smiling. For the first time he realized their connection ran deeper than pride. "Maybe," Elijah finally said, his tone calm but firm, "it's not too late to remember what he taught you." Martin gave a slow, grateful nod. "Maybe not." Outside, the rain began to fade. The clouds broke just enough for a beam of sunlight to touch the Ferrari's hood, turning the droplets into diamonds. It was as if the universe itself was forgiving a man who had forgotten where he came from, and reminding another that legacy isn't about what you own, but what you carry forward. The garage was quiet except for the rhythmic clank of metal and the low hum of an old radio in the corner. The scent of oil and rust mixed with something cleaner, hope. Martin Kane, the once arrogant millionaire, stood beside Elijah, sleeves rolled up, grease on his hands for the first time in years. He was no longer the man who threw insults like darts. He was just a man trying to make something right. They worked in silence for a while, each turn of the wrench peeling back another layer of bitterness. The old Buick's engine had seen better days, but in a way so had they both. Martin wiped sweat from his brow. You know," he said with a quiet laugh, "I haven't held a wrench since your father's shop. He used to yell at me for over-tightening bolts." Elijah smiled faintly without looking up. He yelled at everyone. But if he yelled, it meant he cared. The words hung in the air like incense. For a long time, neither spoke. They just kept working, tightening, polishing, rebuilding. Finally, Martin broke the silence. "I was jealous of him," he admitted. "Of your father. He had so little, but everyone respected him. He walked into a room and people listened, not because of money, but because of who he was. I spent my whole life trying to buy that feeling." Elijah stopped what he was doing and leaned against the car. "And did you?" Martin gave a weary shake of his head. "No. The more I bought, the emptier I felt. When I saw you standing there in the rain, confident and calm, I saw him. I saw the man I used to want to be. Elijah looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "Then maybe it's time you stop trying to buy your worth and start earning it again." The words didn't sting. They healed. As dusk fell, the two men pushed the repaired Buick out of the garage. The setting sun painted the sky gold and orange, glinting off the Ferrari parked nearby, the symbol of pride that had started it all. Martin looked at both cars, then turned to Elijah. "You know," he said slowly, "when I gave you that Ferrari, I thought I was getting rid of a reminder of my failure. But now I realize it was never the car, it was me. I needed to face the kind of man I'd become." Elijah crossed his arms, eyes thoughtful. "The car was just metal. What you do next decides if that lesson sticks." A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth through the open doors. It felt like renewal. Martin hesitated for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "This is a deed," he said quietly, "for the building next door. Your father once dreamed of expanding this garage, training kids who had nowhere else to go. I want to make that happen. With you." Elijah's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because," Martin said, voice thick with emotion, "your father believed in me when I was nothing. I failed him. Maybe it's time I believe in his son." For the first time, Elijah's composure cracked. His throat tightened. He glanced at the letter, then at Martin. "This doesn't erase what happened," he said. "You humiliated me and you can't undo that with property papers." Martin nodded solemnly. "I know, but maybe I can start making amends, with actions, not money." Elijah looked at him for a long moment before extending his hand. "Then we start tomorrow. No titles, no press. Just work." Martin took his hand, gripping it firmly. "Agreed." Weeks passed. The new Carter and Kane restoration garage opened quietly, but drew crowds faster than either expected. Elijah trained young mechanics from struggling neighborhoods, just like his father once dreamed. Martin handled logistics, funding, and, perhaps most surprisingly, swept floors without complaint. Every morning he arrived early, wearing jeans instead of designer suits. And every evening, he left with grease on his hands and a peace he hadn't known in decades. One afternoon, a boy no older than 16 stood watching from across the street. Elijah noticed and waved him over. "You like cars?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly. "Yeah, but I don't know anything about fixing them." Martin stepped forward with a smile that actually reached his eyes. "Neither did I once. But the best mechanics start with curiosity, not skill." He tossed the boy a wrench. "You'll learn." The boy's grin was wide and hopeful, the same kind of grin Martin remembered wearing as a kid in Harold Carter's shop. That evening, when the shop finally grew quiet, Martin looked around. The laughter, the sound of tools, the scent of oil, it all reminded him of who he used to be, and who he'd become again. Elijah leaned against the Ferrari, now polished to perfection, and said, "You know, she runs smoother than ever. Guess she just needed a bit of care and forgiveness." Martin looked at the car, then at Elijah. "Funny," he murmured. "So did I." The two men stood in silence for a while, watching the last light of day fade through the garage windows. And for the first time in years, Martin felt like his soul, much like that old Ferrari, had finally been restored. Months passed like a quiet sunrise after a long storm. The once-forgotten corner of the city now buzzed with energy, laughter, and purpose. Where rust and silence once ruled, now stood a place of rebirth, Carter and Halloway Restoration Garage, a name that carried both memory and redemption. The Ferrari, the same one that had once been a symbol of arrogance, insult, and pride, gleamed in the sunlight at the entrance. But it wasn't for sale. A small plaque beneath it read, "Built by heart, reclaimed by faith." Every morning Elijah would pass by that plaque and touch it briefly, as though greeting an old friend. To him, it wasn't just a car. It was proof that dignity could not be stolen. That compassion could repair even the deepest cracks in a man's soul. Martin, now in work clothes more often than suits, spent his mornings sweeping the floor before anyone arrived. He no longer barked orders, and he asked, listened, learned. The employees, many of them young men from struggling neighborhoods, respected him not because of his money, but because he showed up every day to earn it. One late afternoon, as the garage buzzed with the sound of engines and laughter, Elijah called out, "All right, everyone, pack up early today. "We've got a visitor coming." The staff exchanged glances, curious. A sleek black sedan pulled up outside, and out stepped a woman in her 60s, her silver hair glowing in the fading light. Martin froze where he stood. Elijah glanced at him and instantly understood. It was Mrs. Halloway, Martin's mother. She looked around the garage, her eyes soft but searching. "So this is where you've been hiding, son?" Martin took a deep breath, wiping his hands nervously. "Not hiding, Mom, working." Her gaze fell on Elijah, then on the Ferrari gleaming in the corner. "I saw the name outside," she said. "Carter and Halloway. Your father would have been proud. And Harold Carter. I remember him." "A good man," Elijah smiled politely. "He was. My father taught me that every broken thing deserves a chance to run again." Mrs. Halloway nodded, her eyes moist. "And maybe that applies to people too." She turned to Martin. "You finally learned that lesson?" Martin exhaled shakily. "The hard way," he admitted. As the sun dipped lower, painting the world in gold, Elijah and Martin stood outside the garage. The hum of city life softened into a gentle breeze. "You know," Elijah began quietly, "sometimes I still hear my father's voice when I'm working on an engine, telling me to slow down, to listen. Machines talk. You just have to listen close enough." Martin smiled faintly. "Maybe people do too. I just stopped listening for too long." Elijah glanced at the Ferrari. "That car, she's more than a machine. She's a story. Yours, mine, my father's. A reminder that sometimes the hardest things to fix aren't made of metal." Martin nodded. "Yeah, sometimes they're made of pride." There was a pause. Then Elijah turned to him and said, "You've changed, Martin." Martin looked down at his grease-stained hands, then up at the golden sky. "I had help," he said softly. "You showed me that redemption isn't given, it's earned. Every day." Later that evening, as the garage lights flickered off one by one, Martin walked to the Ferrari. He ran his hand along the smooth red surface, his reflection looking back at him, older, humbler, finally at peace. He whispered, "You were supposed to be a trophy, but you turned out to be a teacher." From behind him, Elijah's voice carried gently, "Funny how life works. Sometimes the engine that won't start is the one that teaches you patience." Martin chuckled. "And forgiveness." They stood together in silence, the night settling around them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Elijah said quietly, "You know, Martin, my father used to say something I never understood until now. The heart remembers what the mind forgets." Martin turned to him. "What did he mean?" "That even when people fail you deep down, the heart still remembers the good in them. It's what keeps us from becoming bitter." Martin's throat tightened. "Then I hope one day your heart remembers me kindly." Elijah smiled faintly. "It already does." Weeks later, the garage hosted a small community event. Kids racing model cars, families laughing, music echoing in the distance. Among the crowd stood Martin, handing out tools and teaching kids how to build small engines. A boy tugged on his sleeve and asked, "Mister, is that your Ferrari?" Martin smiled. "No, kid. That Ferrari belongs to everyone who's ever been told they can't do something and proved they could." The boy's eyes widened with admiration. "Then maybe one day I'll build my own," Martin grinned. "And I'll be right here to see it." As the crowd cheered and laughter filled the air, Martin looked up at the sky, a tear escaping his eye. He thought of Harold Carter, of his younger self, of all the chances he'd wasted, and all the new ones life had given him. He whispered to the wind, "Thank you for letting me remember who I am." When the sun finally set, the sign above the garage glowed in the warm streetlight, "Carter and Halloway Restoration, where engines and hearts run again." And in that glow, Martin realized something profound, that the real restoration had never been about a Ferrari. It was about the restoration of a man's soul, and the quiet forgiveness of a heart that always remembered.